Hey there, and welcome to the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit, where we are all about technology and that good, solid teaching in the classroom, those things that can really help you out and be practical for you to use in your classroom right away. I'm Matt Miller, the host of the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit and author of Ditch That Textbook. And in all of our topics to this point, we've been real focused on education and the classroom and everything. And so for this video, we're kind of in some ways branching out from that, but in some ways staying very much in that same vein. And we're going to talk about habits. And I know that, habits, maybe the first thing you think of is like, well, I don't chew my nails, so what's the big deal here? But this is one of those things where I think this can really help. Whenever I work with teachers, so often they always tell me that the big barrier that they have to doing whatever they want to do, whatever matters most, whatever is the most important to them, they feel like the biggest barrier is always time. And I think that by improving our habits, becoming kind of like our most effective and efficient selves, I think this is the kind of thing that can help us get some of that time back, help our students to use their time wisely, and really just kind of become the best people we can be. That idea of like living your best life. I think this is kind of in that right direction. And the guy that we've got to talk to us about that has written the book on the subject. He's the author of Atomic Habits. This is a book that I have loved so far, and I'm super excited to get to talk to James Clear. James, how are you doing? And can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. Nice to talk to you. I'm doing well. I'm James Clear. I'm the author of Atomic Habits. I've written about habits and behavior change for about 6 years now. I write about habits, decision-making, continuous improvement, and kind of all of these topics related to getting a little bit better each day. I've been doing that mostly at jamesclear.com, but my work has also been covered on Entrepreneur and Forbes and the New York Times, CBS This Morning, a variety of other places. And one of my great joys of doing this work is being able to help people build better habits, or see, whether it's in the classroom, in the boardroom, at work, or at home, build good habits and break bad ones. And Atomic Habits was written with the intention to be the definitive guide on how exactly to do that. There are quite a few books that have come out that talk about what a habit is and how it works, but I thought there was a gap in the explanation of what to actually do about that and how to implement it. And so the book was written to be very actionable, easy to use, easy to understand, and hopefully that's how it lands with people.
Yeah, I think so. And it has been to me. And I know that's really, that's what makes this such a perfect fit. I think we've been real intentional about being practical and actionable in the kinds of things that people can do, trying to avoid, the big picture, high level stuff, and really making this something that people can use. And so it sounds like this is going to be a perfect fit. So as we jump into this real quick, I was hoping that maybe you could talk to us a little bit about just habits in general. I know it seems like, whatever those habits are, good habits, bad habits, they do have some commonalities, and it's kind of important to be able to see those, right?
Sure. So I think first we could just talk about like what is a habit and what role does it serve, and then I'll break it down into some like simple stages to understand how it works. So I like to think about it. So the technical definition of a habit is a behavior that's been repeated enough times to be done more or less automatically, more or less without thinking. Now, this often, would apply to something like brushing your teeth or tying your shoes, or, unplugging the toaster after each use. Like, we do all these things kind of on autopilot. But I think there's another way to frame what a habit is, and it will provide some insight that we'll come back to in a moment when we break it down into these different stages. So you can think of habits as the recurring solutions to the problems that you face again and again. So they're kind of like a script that your brain pulls out whenever the context is appropriate. So to take like tying your shoes as an example, if you put your shoe on and your shoe is untied, then that's in a small sense a problem that your brain needs to solve. And the first time you tie your shoes, it's effortful and you have to spend a lot of time teaching yourself how to do it. But then you do it 50 or 100 or 500 times, and pretty soon you can do it without thinking. And Then you can think about what's on your to-do list for the day while you tie your shoes, or hold a conversation with somebody else, and so on. And this is the role that habits play. This is why they're useful, why the brain naturally wants to form them, is that it allows you to provide a solution to a problem that you face while freeing up your attention and energy to focus on other areas. So they're kind of like energy savers or mental shortcuts that give you the same solution, but with less energy and attention. Now, to understand how that works, I think we can divide a habit into 4 stages. So that first stage is what I would call the cue. There's some kind of cue that signals or triggers or prompts you to take an action. So for example, maybe you walk into the kitchen and you see a loaf of bread sitting on the counter. So in that case, it's like a visual cue. Then there is the second stage, which is what I would call the craving. And the craving is, the way to think about it is, it's like the prediction that your brain makes about what the cue means. So like if you walk into the kitchen in the morning, you might see that loaf of bread, and your craving or your prediction is, oh, I need to make toast and have breakfast. And so then the third stage is the response, which is in this case actually taking the bread out and putting it in the toaster. And then the fourth and final stage is the reward, the benefit. So maybe, for example, you get a bite of this like buttery toast, or you get the reward of the satisfaction of eating breakfast, and so on. Now, you can just as easily imagine a different time, like let's say you just finished eating breakfast and you walk in and you see the loaf of bread on the counter, and now it means something different. Your craving is different. Your interpretation is different. Now you think, oh, I'm full, so I don't want to make another piece of toast. And so my point there is that second stage about craving, the interpretation of the cue, that kind of determines whether you're motivated to take action or not. So it's sort of like the stage when motivation arises. So to summarize, the first stage is the cue, the second stage is the craving, the third stage is the response, and the fourth stage is the reward. So cue, craving, response, reward. And those form a feedback loop. And the more that you go through that cycle and you start to learn, oh, whenever I walk into the kitchen at 8 a.m. and make some toast, it's rewarding. And so you like tighten that loop, and pretty soon you're making your morning toast on autopilot without thinking about it.
Nice. Okay. Very good. Yeah. So, yeah, I can see this in my own, like, for instance, when I was in the classroom, on my best days, whenever this was working well, I could kind of see how this would work with grading papers. For me, the cue was the bell rang before my prep period. And then there was the crave it. Well, I don't know if this is exactly, maybe you can walk me through this a little bit, because I wasn't exactly craving to grade papers, although maybe the thought in my mind of having my tray completely empty and knowing that it's done was the craving that I was seeking. And then there was, I don't know, am I getting at least sort of close on this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you could just say, like, your expectation at that moment is, oh, if I don't do this now, I'm not going to have time for it later. Right. And so you're motivated. Hearing the bell ring is a signal, a cue that reminds you, oh, I need to take action. And so craving, the way that I use the term is different than the way that we often use it in common language, which is, oh, I'm craving a donut, I'm craving a cigarette, something like that. What I mean is it's when you make a prediction that I should take action. And so in this sense, the bell ringing was a prediction of, it was followed by a prediction of, oh, I should take action and get this done.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. All right. So then the response obviously is the grading, and then the reward is, I'm done. This is off of my shoulders, and it's all good. Right.
Well, and what's interesting about, that's true. And what's interesting about the reward, and I think this is why it's somewhat useful to have the craving as part of these 4 stages. Often the reward is satisfying the craving. So you might feel like, oh, I have these papers I have to get through. And then once you're through with them, it's a feeling of relief. It's the relieving of the craving that is satisfying. That is the reward.
Okay.
And so this is why people will often procrastinate up until the point where they get enough, there's like enough pain where suddenly, oh, I need to take action, like get this anxiety out of my life. And they do it, and then they're relieved of that anxiety of having this thing hanging over their head. But you often procrastinate up until the point that the craving gets, the desire gets high enough, and then you finally take action.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, cool. So, so now that we kind of know how that works, there's that whole habit loop, and they all sort of have those same commonalities. The hard part I've found, and I bet a lot of the people you've worked with have found, is once we identify that habit, we think, I want to break a bad habit, or I want to put in a new habit. And that's obviously the work here, right? If it was easy to set habits, then we all would have them done and we'd all be in really good shape and be, efficient and effective and are living our best lives. But obviously that isn't the case. And so when we're trying to set new habits, you've got a variety of things that habits need to have to be able to stick, more or less, right?
Right. So I call these the 4 laws of behavior change. And basically, we just come up with a law or a principle that you can follow for each of those 4 stages. So for the cue, if you want to build good habits, you want to make it obvious. You want the cues of your habits to be obvious, available, visible. So for example, I had a friend who wanted to practice more violin. And so he put his violin right in the middle of his living room. So he would pass it 30 times a day. So he made it obvious. And then, lo and behold, he ends up practicing for an hour or so just because it's there. So make it obvious is the first law. Make it attractive is the second law. The more attractive a habit is, the more likely you are to follow through on it. And we'll talk more about that. Make it easy is the third law. So with the response, the more easy, frictionless, convenient a habit is, the more likely it is to occur. And then finally, the reward, you want to make it satisfying. If a habit is satisfying, if it's followed by like a feeling of pleasure, then you're more likely to follow through on it afterward, or to repeat it in the future. So those 4 laws: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. That explains how to build a good habit. And then if you want to break a bad habit, you just invert them. So rather than make it obvious, you want to make it invisible. Rather than make it attractive,
Okay.
rather than make it easy, make it difficult. Rather than make it satisfying, make it unsatisfying. And Atomic Habits covers, of course, dozens of ways to do those things, and we'll get into some of them right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to that, that's the big question that I've got here, is if we're talking about ways to make it obvious, ways to make it attractive, easy, satisfying, stuff like that, what are some of those suggestions, those actionable things we can do to follow through on those?
Yeah. So the first thing, for make it obvious, it often comes down to what I call environment design. So I mentioned the one example about the violin. I did something similar when I wanted to start flossing. So I realized that I often didn't floss simply because it wasn't obvious. It was like hidden. The floss was hidden away in a drawer in the bathroom. So I just wouldn't see it or think about it. So I took it out of the drawer, bought a little bowl, put that bowl right next to my toothbrush, and put the floss inside. And so now I brush my teeth, put the toothbrush down, pick the floss up. That was pretty much all I needed to do to build that habit. It was just making it obvious so that I could actually see it and act upon it when I was ready.
Right.
Now, in the classroom, there are a variety of ways to do this. You can see, especially kindergarten classrooms are often like this. They're designed so that all the items that are in the classroom have a very obvious location where they go. Like there's a bin where your books go, and there is a bin where the toys go, and there's a location where you sit for the reading group, and so on. And often cases, things are color coded as well. So like if you're part of the blue reading group, you put your books in the blue bin and you sit in the blue chair, and so on. And there's like this unity of signals and cues in the classroom that makes it very clear and obvious where to act and what to do. And so I think that's one way teachers can use that throughout their classrooms and spaces. So that's the first one, is make it obvious. Now, for breaking a bad habit, you want to do the inverse, right? I said make it invisible. Right. So take, for example, like watching television. If you walk into pretty much any living room, where do all the couches and chairs face? All television, TV, right? Yeah. So like, what is this room designed to get you to do? What is the most obvious thing in that space? And there are a variety of choices you could have here, right? You could like take a chair and turn it so that it doesn't face the TV, or you could put the television inside a wall unit or a cabinet so that it's behind doors and a little less visible.
Hmm.
You could take the remote control and put it inside a drawer so that you're less likely to see it. Maybe put a book in its place. And all of those are simply ways of trying to make it a little less visible for the distracting thing. And perhaps a little more visible for the good action. So those
Hmm.
are some ways to implement that first law, that first idea of make it obvious.
Okay. No, and that's perfect. And it seems to me like, what you were talking about with you've got the color coding, you've got all of the things in the right places. So that's all driving good habits. And the thing that I also could think of there is, especially in those classrooms with students in their younger years, is that also helps with cues to cue other. And when I say cue here, I'm talking about like the statements that the teacher says to get students to act. So in that case, you say, go put all of your stuff in the blue bin, or put it in the bin that matches your color, or something like that. And that makes the directions a good fit with the
Right.
habit that they want to build, right?
You're essentially like linking the directions or the instructions that you give for acting become tied to the environment, and it becomes easier
Right.
to see that. Like, it becomes easier to distinguish what the precise action is that you should do rather
Right.
than having the instructions be vague.
Yeah.
Um,
Cool.
from a personal standpoint, you can also do this with your digital spaces. So we talked about physical environment design here, but we all look at screens for many hours each day.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I have my phone pulled up here. I don't know if you can see it, but this is
Mm-hmm.
my home screen, and so I have no
Oh
icons
my
on here,
goodness, seriously.
and
Wow.
just the four at the bottom. So right now I usually what I do is I try to make those four icons that are at the bottom the most obvious cues that I want to act upon. And so for a while, when I was trying to build a reading habit, I would put Audible and Pocket there so that I could either listen to an audiobook or read an article. And I saw that as soon as I opened my phone. And then if I want to get to like Instagram, for example, I have to swipe over, and it's inside like a nested folder. And actually, I have to swipe over twice and then get inside here. So my point is, this is a minor choice, but I'm trying to increase the number of steps to make it a little less obvious, a little more invisible, what this distracting behavior is that I'm trying to avoid. I don't want to open up my phone and the very first thing I see is Instagram. I just tap it because it's
Right.
there.
Yeah.
So you can design and curate your digital space, your desktop, your mobile phone screen to also promote some of those behaviors as well.
Yeah. So you basically just think about what is it that I want to do, or what is it I don't want to do, and we're going to make it obvious and clear right there to make it's like you're empowering yourself to make good choices. That's basically what it all comes down to, right?
Absolutely. And this strategy, it bleeds into the third law of behavior change as well, which is make it easy or make it difficult. Because for like the television example, putting the TV inside a wall unit or putting the remote control in a drawer, that makes it invisible. But you can also use environment design to increase the friction of the action, to make it difficult to do. So like, you could take the batteries out of the remote control after each time you use it, so that it adds an extra 5 or 10 seconds. And maybe that's enough time for you to be like, oh, do I really want to watch something, or am I just turning the TV on mindlessly?
Mm-hmm.
Or you could unplug the TV after each use, so that now you're like, you only plug it back in if you can say the name of the show you want to watch. So you can't just like turn Netflix on and like browse and find something.
Right.
And those are steps for increasing friction. And the more friction that there is between you and a bad behavior, the less likely it is to occur. Imagine if you're trying to quit smoking and you have a pack of cigarettes that are on the table on the other side of the room, very low friction, or there are no cigarettes in the house and the closest one is 15 miles down the road at like a gas station. And one of those situations, it becomes easier to stick to the behavior than the other. And this is kind of one of the core lessons of environment design, which is the standard narrative about how to build better habits is you need to try harder, you need to want it more, you need more willpower and grit and perseverance. And certainly there's nothing wrong with those qualities. But what some interesting research has shown is that the people who appear to exhibit the highest amount of self-control are actually those who are tempted the least. So from the outside, it looks like, oh, you never fall into this bad behavior. You're able to avoid the things that distract me all the time. But on the inside, what's actually happening is they aren't seeing as many cues that trigger their behavior. So if you're trying to stick to a diet, don't follow a bunch of food blogs on Instagram. You're constantly being triggered to eat more.
Right.
Or if you don't want to spend as much money on electronics, well, don't follow tech review blogs or the latest like unboxing channel on YouTube or things like that. You're constantly being prompted to do the behavior you're trying to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine how if you were in an environment where you're prompted all the time, you might be able to resist that for a little while, but it's very hard to resist that in the long run. And so the punchline here is that one of the most effective ways to build better habits and to essentially instantly boost your willpower and give yourself more grit and perseverance is not to actually try harder or to push harder on the willpower, but it's to take that time and energy and attention and put it toward designing a space where you're not tempted or where the cues of your good habits are obvious and frictionless and easy, and your bad habits are difficult and invisible.
Yeah, that's so great. So of course that makes me go right into the classroom and I start thinking, how can we, instead of trying harder ourselves, or even if we want to create good habits in our students, instead of, yelling at them over and over again because they won't do those things, how can we set up some friction between them and the things that they don't need to do? Or how can we make it easier, maybe make it closer in reach, or, kind of like empower them to do those things that we actually do want to? And
a
lot of that. Yeah,
it
go
makes
ahead.
me think of, I have a story in the book, I think it's chapter 6, where I talk about a hospital that they have this cafeteria. And the researchers had this thought, like, could we change the diet habits of the people who eat here without actually like trying to motivate them, without talking to them? So, as a teacher, you could think, are there things I could do in the classroom to change the behavior of students without having to constantly remind them what to do?
Yeah.
And so in this particular study, they redesigned the cafeteria so that previously the refrigerators that were by the cashier only had soda and juice in them. And so they kept the soda in them, but they added water as an option to every fridge. And then they also set up some of those little rolling carts with water, and they put that around the cafeteria, like by the buffet lines and things like that. And that was it. That was all they did. They basically just made water more obvious, more visible. And lo and behold, over the next 6 months, water sales go up like 25% and soda sales decrease like 10%.
Huh.
And it's funny because if you were to go to talk to someone sitting in the cafeteria and say, why are you drinking Coke? Like most people would say, oh, well, I wanted to drink that. But the truth is, I don't know, at least 10% of those people drank it because it was an obvious option, because it was the only thing presented to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got 25% of these people who now they're drinking water just because it was more prevalent, more obvious. So my point here is that if you make the good behaviors more obvious, accessible, and convenient in your classroom, and the bad behaviors less so, then it's certainly more likely that students will fall into those by default rather than by you coaxing them into it.
Yeah. And that even makes me think, I think this is kind of in the same vein of what we're talking about here, that if we want our students to be less dependent on us and be a little bit more independent, then all of those little comments that we're continuously making to fix their behavior or to make sure that they do something before they even have a chance to do it, all of those little comments are basically setting up the habit of them being dependent on us. And if we were to hold back on that and just wait and give them the chance to actually act on their own, that's another one of those ways, kind of in the same discussion, where we can set up that good habit, right?
Well, and you bring up a good point. And this is one of the reasons I think Atomic Habits is why I want to share it with so many people, why I think it's important.
Yeah.
Is because in a sense, what you really need to teach the student is not to listen to you, but how to design a system that fosters good behavior naturally.
Yes.
You give them the toolkit to create their own environment where they can have good habits. Like they're only in your classroom for a few hours a day, right? And those hours are meaningful, but what happens when they go home? So if they have a toolkit for going home and creating an environment where they can build better habits, Now suddenly it's like, it's the difference between like give a man a fish versus teach a man.
Yes, thank you.
And so by giving them this playbook for how habits work and how to design an environment that fosters good habits and so on, now suddenly they have the keys to the kingdom and they can, create the space to build the habits that they want.
Right. Exactly. When we're talking about habits, there's one part of the book that this just reminded me of that I loved.
Sure.
I know how you said at some point in there that sometimes people think, well, if I'm tied into all of these habits, I'm constrained, and I want to be free to act and do whatever I want. And you say, habits really do give you freedom, because kind of like what you're saying there, you don't have to consciously make decisions over and over again, because the habits that you want, or the decisions that you want to automate, your brain automatically makes those decisions when you have good habits in place, and it frees you up to do other things. Like, you don't have to think about, like you were saying earlier, tying your shoes all the time. You're free to think about something else or talk to somebody while you tie your shoes, so you don't have to give it your full attention.
Yeah, this is a common criticism, I guess, or worry. I guess I should say worry. It's common worry that people seem to have, that like, oh, if I build all these habits, will I be too robotic, right? Will I fall into this pattern and pigeonhole myself into a certain type of lifestyle or something? What about freedom and spontaneity and creative thinking and so on? And I think this is actually a false dichotomy. Habits do not restrict freedom, they create it. And the way that I would describe this, similar to what you just said, which is that it's often the people who have the best habits that actually have the most freedom, right? So like, if you have good financial habits, now you have the ability to spend on other things that you wouldn't before. Whereas if you have bad financial habits, you're always wondering, like, where's the next dollar going to come from? Or if you don't have good learning habits, you always feel like you're behind the curve. Or if you don't have good nutrition habits, or you have bad exercise habits, now you're wondering, you always feel like you don't have enough energy. But by getting those habits dialed in, you create the resources, the space, the opportunity to do more spontaneous stuff or creative stuff and so on. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not that your whole life should be habitualized, but that by making a few key areas habits, you free up you give yourself leverage in the other areas of life.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Okay, very good. So we've talked about making our habits obvious and making them easy. We've got attractive and satisfying next. Do you want to take us to one of those?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about making habits attractive. So basically, the more attractive a habit is, the more motivated you'll feel to do it. And there are two things that I want to bring up here. So the first is just a simple tactic. You can use something that's called temptation bundling for making a habit more attractive. And the basic idea is you take something that you want to do and you pair it with something you need to do. So one example that I like is one woman that I came across in my research. She needed to answer overdue work emails. Her inbox was always a mess, but she really wanted to get a pedicure. And so she set a rule for herself where she was only allowed to get a pedicure if she was processing overdue work emails while she was there.
Okay.
And so now she used the things she wanted to do to motivate her to do the things she needed to do. Another example, there was an engineering student I came across who knew that he needed to be exercising more, but he just kept binging on Netflix all the time. And so he, thanks to his engineering degree, he linked up his laptop and Netflix with his stationary bike in his apartment, so that if he wasn't pedaling on the stationary bike, Netflix would pause. And so he basically had to like ride in order to watch the shows. So two examples there of like finding something that you're interested in or excited about, and then pairing it with something that you actually need to get done.
And, I really feel like teachers are like, they're so dialed into this already, like making deals with kids to get them to do things, if we can work through this and read the next 2 chapters in this book, then I'll give you 5 minutes to chat at the end of class. Or if you'll work on this assignment, then we'll go out for recess a couple minutes early. And so even though we've been doing that, and there's lots of practices that teachers have engaged in for the longest time. This is one that is actually kind of backed up by what you preach about habits, it sounds like.
Yeah. So I can imagine there have been countless ways that teachers have employed this over the years.
Yeah.
It's from a scientific standpoint, it's something that's called pre-max principle, but it's basically just that behaviors that are a behavior is more likely to occur if it's reinforced by something else that you already want to do. Is the simple idea. Okay, so that's just one like little tactic you can use to make a habit more attractive. But the second, and I think bigger picture thing that I want to talk about for what makes habits attractive comes down to social environment. We are all part of multiple tribes. Like some of those tribes are large, like what it means to be American or what it means to be French. And some of those tribes are small, like what it means to be a member of this classroom, or what it means to be a neighbor on your street, or someone who belongs to your local gym. But all of those tribes, large and small, have a set of shared expectations or beliefs. And just take some of your common habits. So like if you walk into an elevator, you turn around to face the front. Or if you have a job interview, you wear a suit and a tie or a dress or something nice. Now, there's no reason it has to be that way. Like you could face the back of the elevator, or you could wear a bathing suit to a job interview, but you don't do that because it violates the expectations of that tribe, of the people in that room. The people in that group have an expectation of how to act. And when habits go with the grain of the expectations of the group, they're very attractive because doing them helps you fit in. When habits go against the grain of the expectations of the group, they're very unattractive because they make you stand out or get outcast. And we all have a deep primal desire to belong to the group, to belong to the tribe, to get along with others. So based on that, the punchline is that you want to join a group, join a tribe where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. Because if it's normal in that group, then it's going to be attractive for you to do, because following that habit is going to help you fit in and belong. Now, this has a particularly interesting application when it comes to kids, because early on, when a child is, say, an infant or 2 years old or 4 years old, and parents know this, it's very obvious to them. Kids are master imitators. And so, you say something, you say a curse word, and then they start doing it. All they have to do is hear you say it once, and then they're imitating it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all kinds of things that are like that. Now, as a child ages, they start imitating their parents less and less and begin imitating their peers more and more. So they continue to imitate, but they just shift who they're imitating. And the role of the tribe becomes increasingly important in which habits and behaviors are attractive to a particular child. So I think back, for example, to my own education. So I was always hanging out with people who were smarter than me. And that led to some interesting things. Like my one buddy, I went to grade school with him. He ended up going to MIT, and he was like super into robotics and stuff, even when we were in grade school. And so he created this little robotics club. It sounds fancy. It was just Legos, and we would like program a conveyor belt to go back and forth. And so he created this club in 5th grade, and I was a part of it because my friend was in it, right? Because he did it. I wanted to do it too. And so that was my first exposure to computers. And then I had another friend a few years later who built his own computers. And I didn't know how to do it, but I started getting even more interested in it from him. And then now I look back, decades later, I'm running a business that's a technology company. And I'm like, well, where was the beginning of that, right? The beginning of it was me imitating my peers in 5th grade and 8th grade and so on.
Yeah.
And so my point there is that certain habits and behaviors are normal in whatever little tribe we're talking about. And if you can expose yourself or your students or your children to tribes where the desired behavior is the normal behavior, it becomes more likely that they imitate those habits and take them on themselves.
Okay. And then that kind of makes me think of, obviously this plays perfectly into friend groups and clubs, like you were saying, and sports and all of that. But it also makes me think of the classes that we have. And a lot of times you don't get choice in that kind of tribe. And I wonder I'll be curious to hear your take on this, if we can change the culture of the tribe sometimes too. And I'd imagine that's probably hard, but it makes me think of a quote that I hear Seth Godin say on his Akimbo podcast a lot. He says, people like us do things like this.
Yeah, I love that quote. That's such a good one from Seth. Yeah. It encapsulates the essence of what it means for a tribe to shape behavior. Once you identify as that, people like us do things like this, then you want to do that because doing it means, oh, I'm one of us. I'm one of the tribe. Your question is a good one, though. And I think that, there are varying degrees here. So, and it depends on where it depends on who you are and what your role is in the student's life. So if you're, for example, the parent, you have a lot of influence here because your kids, as they grow up, they imitate you less and less. And they imitate their peers more and more. But you still have a little bit of influence because you decide what city you live in, what school they go to, which extracurriculars they're part of. You shape, at least to a certain degree, what their friend groups and peers are going to be. And so that's probably more likely to influence it than maybe what you tell them or who the friends are that you put them around. Mm-hmm. Now, teachers, it's a little bit different. It's kind of like family because you don't get to choose the kids in your class. You don't choose your family members, but you do have a little bit of control, and you have it in the sense of you can control where they sit and who they're around. And so if you can shape the classroom such that you can think about it like you have an overall tribe of the class, and then you have kind of these sub tribes, like maybe every 4 seats is a little group, right? And you could take someone who doesn't have the desired behavior and put them around someone who does, right? And I'm sure teachers already do a lot of things like that.
Oh, yes.
And so that is like one way to try to shape the tribe a little bit.
Yeah. And that even reminds me too of how there's so many teachers I know that are kind of like gamifying their class. They're trying to find game elements that they can bring into the overall way that they run the class. And so within that, a lot of times you end up with kind of like teams or tribes or houses, if you want to think of like Harry Potter, where you've got, these different groups within the class. And that sounds like a way to have one of those sub tribes. And then all of a sudden that sub tribe kind of starts to develop its own set of norms and expectations and a characteristics of itself and everything. Mm-hmm. And then again, as the teacher, you would have a lot of control over that, I'd imagine, because if for some reason, whether you decide, hey, this is part of the game, or just my decision as the teacher, we need to change these tribes up a little bit. Now, all of a sudden, you have this brand new dynamic, and these sub tribes can kind of change around. So I guess in that way, teachers still can sort of have some control over that. Certainly. And it's really complicated. I like thinking through that, but I can already see there are like a ton of moving pieces there. Let's say you go with Harry Potter and you have these 4 houses throughout your classroom. Well, then do you tell the students that each house is known for something? Like this house is known for being brave, and this house is known for being loyal, and this house is known for being intelligent, and so on. And I don't know what the qualities are that you'd want to promote with that, but you could maybe it could go one. I could see it going one of 2 ways. You could either try to find a student who's weak in that area and put them in that house so that they develop that ability. Maybe you don't think that the student is brave and bold and confident enough, and so you put them in the house that bravery is like the thing, and then, kind of like fake it till you make it almost. Yeah, well, and they're more likely to take it on because all the other kids in their group also identify with that. Yeah. So maybe there's something there, but I could also see it working the other way, where you say, let me try to identify the strengths of each student and put them in a house that magnifies their strengths so that we get to pull out the best in them. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's hard to know which one of those strategies is best, but there's a lot of elements there. I could even see where if you let the kids kind of figure that out on their own, again, that could go either way. And they could be like, hey, we're known for it. And it's a bunch of things that you don't necessarily want them to be known for. Okay. So we've talked about obvious, attractive. We've talked about easy sum. Do you want to go to satisfying next on ways that we can make them? Let me finish with an idea for easy that I haven't covered. And satisfying. So
If I'm going to recommend one place to start for building better habits, it's making it easy. And the strategy that I like to recommend is what I call the 2-minute rule. So you take whatever habit you're trying to build and scale it down to just the first 2 minutes. So, it doesn't matter how ambitious the plan is, like read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat, or meditate every day for the next 30 days becomes meditate for 60 seconds. But it's something you can do in 2 minutes or less. And the idea here, and the key caveat, and I think this is true whether we're building habits for adults or for children, is that a habit must be established before it can be improved. So often people are focused on finding the best workout program, the best diet plan, the perfect business idea, the ideal lesson plan or whatever, that we never get over that hump and master the art of showing up. And really the first thing that needs to happen is you need to become the type of person who doesn't miss. You need to become the type of person who shows up each day, to foster a new identity of, I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts, even if that's only 5 push-ups, right? But like I make sure that I get my workout in. Or I'm the type of person who writes each day. Maybe that's only 1 sentence, but I'm a writer. And that sounds like not much in the beginning, but it can really be meaningful in the long run because you're fostering the identity of being that kind of person. Yeah. So that's I think the 2-minute rule is the best place to start for making it easy. Making it satisfying is really just about having a satisfying ending to the behavior, about having some kind of pleasure or enjoyment follow the action that you're doing. Because if a behavior is satisfying, you're more likely to repeat it in the future. Now, there are a bunch of great business examples of this. So if you take, for example, toothpaste is a common one. There's no reason that toothpaste needs to taste minty. It could just be like a bland paste, but still clean your teeth. But they add mint flavor because that's more satisfying. It gives you this clean mouth feel. And so it feels good to brush your teeth. Chewing gum was similar. For a long time, for centuries, chewing gum was around. It was like this bland resin. So it was chewy, but it wasn't very tasty. But then Wrigley came around in the late 1800s and came out with juicy fruit and spearmint and double mint. And finally, chewing gum had these fun flavors. And lo and behold, as soon as they did that, it became more satisfying, and chewing gum took off as this worldwide habit. So I think the way that I would recommend doing this, both as an individual and in the classroom, and teachers already do this to a certain degree, is you can utilize either tracking and measurement. So sometimes, a student does something and they get a gold star, or we had multiplication table I can remember in our 4th grade classroom where as soon as you did all the 7s you got you moved up the table or whatever. Right. So that kind of tracking, or some kind of, you're layering essentially some kind of variable reward onto it. So here's how this might work. Say you're trying to get your kids to learn how to brush their teeth, or to build the habit of brushing their teeth. Well, each time they brush, they put the toothbrush down, they finish, and you have like a jar of marbles next to the sink. And let's say there are 100 marbles in there, and 90 of them are blue and 10 of them are red. And if you pull out a blue one, then it's just another marble, and it's like, good job, you did your toothbrush. But if you pull out a red one, they get some kind of prize. Maybe they get to, I don't know, watch 10 minutes of their favorite Disney show before they go to bed or something like that. And of course, you could do this type of variable reward stuff in the classroom as well, where students get tokens, or they pull out a marble after completing each task or something like that. But that inherently makes the habit more satisfying because it gives you a reward that follows it.
Yeah, I love that. As you were, you probably saw me doing this while you were talking. As you were talking about that, that reminded me of, I'm a big fan of Austin Kleon, who's written a couple of books called, one is Steal Like an Artist. This is the Steal Like an Artist journal. He also wrote a book called Show Your Work. And he's really big on this too, on, creating that, that challenge for yourself where you continue to do something. And that reminded me of a page in this Steal Like an Artist journal. And so basically what he's done here is he has this 30-day challenge, and it says every day I will do this. And it gives you a spot where you X off another one. And once you start to see that chain grow, I would imagine that makes it probably pretty satisfying. Then even at the bottom, it says, I will not break the chain. And then after 30 days, I get this. I love that.
Yeah, that's nice. So, that type of habit tracking, simplest version is just put an X on the calendar.
Right. Yeah.
And that philosophy of don't break the chain, just keep the X's going. It's nice because it has this kind of additive effect of motivation, right? It's like, oh, I've done it 4 days in a row. I don't want to break the chain. I want to keep the streak going. The one caveat that I like to add to that I think is a nice addition is every habit streak will come to an end at some point. Like maybe you do it for 7 days, maybe you do it for 16 days, maybe you do it for 8 months. But at some point, you get sick or you have to travel for work or things are crazy with your kids or whatever it is, life gets in the way. And so the philosophy that I like to keep in mind, because sometimes the breaking of a streak can be a little bit depressing or upsetting, or it feels like you fell off track. The philosophy I like to keep in mind, the mantra, is never miss twice. So and this is particularly good if you're dealing with like diets. That happens a lot. Someone sticks to a new diet, they do it for 6 days, and then their friends want to go to happy hour and they go out and drink, or they binge eat a pizza or something or whatever.
Yeah.
And at that point, it becomes very easy to say, oh, like I knew it. I knew I was going to blow it. I guess I'm not made for this diet. I guess I'm not being able to stick to it. And a lot of the time people let that single mistake spiral into a bunch of repeated mistakes. They let that one miss turn into, a week or a month or 3 months of missing entirely. Now, what I like to say is never miss twice. Okay, I wish that I hadn't binge ate, but never miss twice. So let me make sure that I put all my energy into getting a healthy meal for breakfast tomorrow. Or when I was starting my writing habit, I would write a new article every Monday and Thursday. If I missed on Thursday, well, I wish that hadn't happened, but never miss twice. Let me make sure that I pour all my energy into getting back in there on Monday and publishing a new one. And I think if you combine those two strategies of don't break the chain and put an X on the calendar each day, but when the chain is broken, never miss twice and start a new streak as fast as possible, then you're in a really good position, because you get to the end of the year and you realize, oh, that 1 or 2 times I missed, like that's just a blip on the radar. But that's only true if you adopt that philosophy of never miss twice.
Yeah, I love that. That reminds me of, I had this streak going with one of those calorie tracker apps. And I had, I actually started on Thanksgiving Day, which is a really strange day to start one of those, but I did. And I got it up over 100 days. And I had my calories set in a place where I was supposed to lose a pound every week, or I think it was every 2 weeks or something like that. So after 100 days, and I was faithful to it, and it was working and it was great. And eventually I got to the point where I wasn't going to be able to make it. And I was getting kind of burned out by having such, low amount of calories every single day. And eventually I didn't make it. And I missed out on that opportunity that you said to not miss twice. I should have started another streak right after. But then I thought, oh, I've got this. I have a good feel for how many calories I consume at a time. I can do it without the tracker. And it has not been good since. And so that reminds me of another way of looking at this that I saw in John Acuff's book, Finish, is he said, beware of the day after perfect, which kind of sounds like what you're talking about. He called it that. And he said, that's the day when everything totally goes off the rails. And so for him, it was the day after perfect. For you, it was don't miss twice. And I think no matter how you look at that, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's really, it's never the first mistake that ruins you. It's like the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows. Yeah. And if you can adopt that philosophy and just keep it to single mistakes, then you'll be in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we've touched on all of them at this point, all 4 of the parts of the habits. And so, I thought I'd just throw this out to you, and we haven't, scripted this ahead of time, so I don't know what your answer will be to this, but is there anything else that you can think of related to what you've written either in the book or in blog posts or whatever that you think would be useful for, folks like us that are working with students or that are limited on our time and are trying to make the most of like a prep period or something like that? Is there anything else that comes to mind that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, there is one more. So it's called the Goldilocks rule, and I write about it later in the book. And I think a lot of teachers will implicitly get this as soon as I say it, but it's a very important concept to understand and stick to if you want to maintain motivation. So the Goldilocks rule states that humans experience peak levels of motivation when they're working on a challenge of just manageable difficulty. So not too hard, not too easy, just right. And I like to use tennis as an example. If you play a tennis match against a professional tennis player, it gets boring pretty quickly because you lose every point. If you play a tennis match against like a 4-year-old, it might be cute, but if you're, like trying to actually play a match, it gets boring pretty quickly because you win every point. Mm-hmm. But if you play against someone who is your peer, they win a few points, you win a few points, you have a chance to win the match, but only if you really try. That's when you get kind of in that peak level of focus, attention, a state of flow. You're fully motivated. And that's a challenge of just manageable difficulty. That's that Goldilocks zone. The reason that I bring it up with respect to teaching and education is that if you want to, at some level, I think the key to all learning is the willingness to be curious, or the desire to be curious. Yes. If you're a curious person, if you have curiosity, then you want to learn. You want to ask questions. You want to investigate topics. You want to discover something new. And that's really what the process of learning is. If you're willing to maintain curiosity, if you're able to, then you're going to learn a lot of new things. And so the question is like, well, how do you keep kids curious? And I think that some of that is personality. There's going to be differences among people, but there's certainly something to keeping people in that Goldilocks zone. And that maintains curiosity and motivation, because if it's too easy for a student, they get bored. If it's too difficult, they get bored and give up. Mm-hmm. And so, this is why, like, if you're teaching students how to read, you want to always make sure you're kind of on the cusp of their reading level so that they continue to progress, but also have enough challenge to stay interested and engaged. Mm-hmm. And there are probably some things that we could do here with technology. You're, I'm sure, much more savvy to this than I am about how to personalize the educational experience for each student so that each student is kept on their particular level of ability, or on the cusp of their edge in their Goldilocks zone, even if you have 30 students in the class that are all kind of going through this together. These are some inherent challenges or trade-offs of having a classroom of students, is that each one has a different Goldilocks zone. Right. And so how do you keep them all in that same area? But I think that chapter on the Goldilocks zone and that idea and utilizing that for maintaining motivation and curiosity in the classroom, I think there's like a lot of potential applications there. I don't necessarily know what they all look like, but if I'm thinking about how do you maintain curiosity and good learning habits in a student population, that's going to be a key part of the puzzle.
Yes. I love that. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And, I think one little bit, just real quick as we wrap up here, one little piece of that, I think, is that sometimes we don't allow students to self-select their Goldilocks zone because they know what interests them. They know what challenges them. I think sometimes we just assume that they'll drop the bar so that it's not that much of a challenge, but kids love a good challenge. It's like video games, right. You give a student or a kid or anybody a video game and they go and they beat it in the first 10 minutes, they're going to want their money back. But if they get something that's challenging, that continually pushes them little by little all throughout and raises the stakes little by little throughout, that's the kind of thing that they're going to be hooked on. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
So to build on that video game idea, because I think it's an incredibly important metaphor to bring up, we all know how easy it is to get hooked on video games, to get into that, to be to use a certain language, to be curious about the next level, about advancing in the game. Students or anybody really, adults and children, can be fully engaged in that game. And that raises a good question, which is how come? What is it about a video game that stokes this flame of curiosity and passion and interest? And there are many things going on here, but one thing that video games do really well, and I think that the next wave or next level of education could potentially look something like this. I don't know exactly how it comes to fruition, but one thing that video games do incredibly well is they provide instantaneous feedback and continual signals of progress. So when you're playing a video game, you see your score going up in the top right corner, right? The counter is increasing. Every time you grab a weapon or rubies or coins, you get like a little jingle of music, which is essentially a signal that says, hey, you did the right thing.
Hmm.
Even the pitter patter of steps on the ground as you like advance through a level is feedback, instant feedback that you're making progress. And unlike the real world, video games can give that at the ideal rate. They can give it instantly, and they can give you just enough. And many games will do this, where if you're breezing through a level and advancing really easily, they start to throw more challenges your way.
Hmm.
And if you're struggling, they start to give you more power-ups and resources and so on. And so basically, they try to keep you in this Goldilocks zone where you're making just enough progress to feel motivated and challenged just enough to feel engaged.
Hmm.
And so I think that there are certainly going to be some technological solutions that look kind of like that. And my worry is that the ones I've seen so far have been a little too overt. Like they've been a little too direct. Like, let's take a video game and apply it to education. And it's like, it doesn't quite fit perfectly.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is often the best way to change behavior is through a back door. So like, if you ask, what's the best exercise app that's been created in the last decade? It's probably not an exercise app at all. It's probably something like Pokemon Go, because Pokemon Go got millions of people to walk 5, 10, 15 miles a day, but it wasn't an exercise app. They didn't think they were, oh, let me like get an app and learn how to walk more. It wasn't like a Fitbit, but it was more effective because it changed behavior through that back door. It found a way to give people what they wanted while getting them to do what they needed. And I don't even know that Pokemon Go had an alternate agenda like that. But I think that there's certainly an opportunity in education to create something like that. How can education be like this? Learning is happening all the time. You're learning constantly. Your brain is never not learning throughout life. So how can we create video games or pieces of content or platforms that naturally pull people in, but then on the side, they're soaking up all these skills that they don't even realize they're learning.
Yep. You're right on there. And I'm even starting to see, some of the resources that teachers have available to them that allows them to build some of that. You've got things like Classcraft that lets your progress be tracked by, points and give yourself power-ups and skills and stuff. And you've even got some smaller things like you've got like Pop Tropica and Prodigy. I'm just going off of some of the ones that my kids play that are very game based, and the learning almost happens subconsciously where they're practicing math skills so that they can continue on in this game. And yeah, I think the sky's the limit for all of that stuff. I really think you're onto something. So this has been exactly what I hoped that it was going to be. I got to tell, for those of you that are watching this, I picked this book up, I start reading it. I'm like, I got to get this guy in here so that he can share some of this great stuff out of this book. So James, if folks that are watching here want more of you, want to know more about habits, want to get in contact with you, what's the best place to do that?
Sure. So you can just check jamesclear.com if you want to see more of my writing and get in touch with me. Social media sites are on there as well, contact information, all that. If you click on articles, I think it's just jamesclear.com/articles. I have them organized by category, so you can poke around and see which ones are interesting to you. And then if you'd like to check out the book, it's called Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. And you can get that at atomichabits.com. And I think also on that page, I have some downloads. So there's a habit tracking template. There's a guide on how to apply the ideas to business, a guide on how to apply the ideas to parenting. Anyway, all of that is at atomichabits.com.
Wonderful. And we'll link that up on the speaker page where your video is going to be. So everybody will be able to just scroll down and we'll be able to find a lot of those resources. So this has been wonderful. James, this has been amazing. Thanks so much for giving us the time.